Hello, I'm here with Adam for our 35th office hours. We're talking today about our module on engineering China, and you have a whole bunch of interesting comments. There's just one business item, Adam, you want to remind people of?
Yeah, sure. So from part 8 to part 10, there will only be one round of certificate. So please try to catch up if you want to receive all of those certificates.
Great. We have some interesting questions from learners, just general questions. Why don't you start with the first one?
So our first question is, Professor Kirby highlights the current Politburo Standing Committee has 2 members that are not engineers, unlike the membership on previous PRC between 1979 and 2012. I wonder if this signals a change in the focus of the country's development. How likely will the engineering state continue, and does this new non-engineering membership suggest a refocus on humanities and Confucianism?
Great question. The second one is easier to answer than the first, at least in terms of the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. One doesn't see a refocus in terms of expertise on humanities and Confucianism. However, you do see in this Politburo, this standing committee has 2 individuals who are not engineers by training. One of them is an economist, actually trained with a PhD from the Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang, an unusual academic trajectory.
The other's a lawyer.
And the other is a lawyer. And so, as I think we said in the module, my great fear is that China will go with the way of the United States and be run by lawyers. But that's, I think if you were to look at other places, look at Taiwan, look at Korea, look at Singapore, you will see more and more economists, people trained with some business expertise, but not necessarily business people. You'll see more PhDs, period, entering into political leadership than before. So we have, and let's go to another question we've got down here.
Clearly, the engineering is an impressive development among the Chinese. It is fantastic to learn the stop and go of this progression. I am aware, however, that the Chinese have engineered cities that are virtually empty of people. So are these facades? Are they miscalculations? They want to know more about these empty cities.
They're investments. That's what they are. So don't blame the engineers. You know, they design and build and so on. These are real estate operations and local governments, often building neighborhoods, sometimes whole cities, on speculation. Right. And some of them will be filled in time, and some of them probably not. But I don't blame the engineers for this. Now, one question is, and let me ask you this. The lecture touched upon the decline of the humanities in favor of engineering. Was this an orchestrated movement away from a curriculum which echoed imperial concerns, and did it reflect a pedagogy that ran from the very beginnings of a child's educational experience? In my experience, the answer to that would be no. That is, the government, beginning on the national government in 1932, and then under the Chinese Communist Party after 1949, definitely tilted higher education toward engineering and away from the humanities and the social sciences. And so it is an orchestrated movement in that degree. There's absolutely no question about that. But I don't believe you can go back and say in kindergarten or in 1st and 2nd grade and so on that which is where people learn how to read and write, that there is a movement toward engineering. There is strong teaching in
mathematics, right,
and in science, but particularly in mathematics. And there's the
tracking system.
That is new over the last 200 years, to be sure. But it isn't automatically tracking people into tracks of engineers.
Right. Although we do have the tracking system now in Chinese high schools.
Yeah.
One in the humanities, one in the sciences, I believe.
Yes, that's right. And what do you think they break down? Do you have a
I don't know, but what I've heard all my friends, all the good students want to go into the sciences.
Oh, you must have the wrong friends. I don't know. Okay. Well, those are terrific questions. Now, we asked you a question, and we asked, we generally think of expansion of highways and railways as a good thing, and for good reason. What do you think are some of the effects of expanding highway and railway systems in China? And so some of the pros, let me give you some of the pros, and Adam, you give some of the cons. It improves transportation and trade, internal trade, communication of people. It boosts economic growth, no question. it unites the country economically as well as politically, and it makes people more mobile, socially as well as economically.
Right.
So what bad things?
Well, according to our students, the development of highways and railroads lead to environmental degradation, loss of farmlands, homogenization of culture, labor migration and hollowing of rural areas, weakening traditions of family values, and changes brought by the hukou system.
The homogenization is a very interesting one.
It is.
If you look at urban planning, and anywhere you are in China, the sidewalks are all the same.
Right.
It's a massive country to have that be the case. There are many, as we'll talk about in a little bit, distinguishing features of major Chinese cities. But the homogenization is a very interesting response to that.
At the same time, I think we should maybe not overstress some of these effects. For example, last summer I was in rural Gansu in northwest China, and a new high-speed railroad was being built in the middle of the countryside. So you had the high-speed rail columns being
built above the ground, right.
Yeah, and on the ground there are farmers with oxen plowing fields. Just a couple of miles away from where the high-speed rail was being built in the mountain villages, the villagers had no idea that there was a high-speed rail at all.
And so where's the high-speed rail going from Gansu?
It's going from Xi'an to the capital seat of this. I was in Minxian County, so it was going to the local county seat of Minxian. But as I say, the villagers around that area had no idea that a railway was being even built.
My guess is that that place will be a bigger town in a short period of time.
It will, it will.
So we asked a question about Sun Yat-sen. You remember his grand ideas for the international development of China. And we talked about his different ideas. And what was his best idea? Was it the railroads? Was it canals? Was it the Three Gorges Dam? Was it commercial harbors, iron and steel works, mineral development, and so on? And most people said what?
Well, the unanimous consensus was that it's difficult to choose.
Yeah,
but
it is actually.
But most lean toward the development of communication systems. And I think that's a very good, I think one could make a very good argument for that. I also think, though, maybe one could make a good argument for the development of commercial harbors playing a role in China's development.
You can, but that's much later than some other areas. Very few people chose the last one. We said colonization in Manchuria, Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Tibet, and so on. That is to say, Han colonization. So I think that's right. Communications of all sorts, central to making a modern country a country, which is what a central aim of Sun Yat-sen was. Now we had, I thought, really interesting responses to these quite different videos that we had of different cities, of Nanjing, Shanghai, and Beijing. They're kind of promotional videos, and what do you get out of them? And they're really quite different. Right. And so give us some of the responses here, Adam.
So Bain USA Net said that Nanjing seems cosmopolitan and modern. Beijing represented a harmony between nature, interior urban space, and it ties to imperial history. And Shanghai was a urban landscape which reconfigured the natural world. Right.
I think it's very interesting comments, and it maps on what some other people said. Anson Lai writes, first off, I think the choice of the three videos themselves are hugely problematic. I think that's fair, totally fair. The Beijing video is much longer, wide picture view, very fancier. Restaurants and store stalls, not just iconic pieces. Each one have their own style. The Nanjing one was short and to the point. The Shanghai video was fancier, is what he's effectively saying, as a piece of filmmaking. And it's interesting that Nanjing one shows more modern structures. That if you look at these three things, Nanjing comes across as the more modern city, which I'm not sure, it's arguable. It's an incredibly, they're all three very modern cities today. Whereas the Beijing one tries to capture a Beijing that's actually pretty tough to capture when you're there. That is old Beijing.
Krijizi makes a comment on that. Clearly the difference in length plays a role, but it appears that while Shanghai and Nanjing are advertised as modern commercial cities first, Beijing emphasizes the historical.
Right. And yet the fact is that of these three cities, in many ways, Beijing is the least preserved. But, you know, it's tough to find when you're in Beijing, or when you're in Beijing, as I was last week, stuck in traffic trying to cross the town, 2.5 hours in traffic, unable to see anything because the city is shrouded in smog.
Perpetual smog.
Perpetual smog. But really, it's like the PMI was something like 430 on a scale that only goes up to 500. Very dangerous air. Couldn't see anything, but at least I got some fresh air because the taxi driver wanted to roll down the windows. It was a little chilly. And he asked if I minded if he smoked. And I said, doesn't matter at this point. I'm going to get a lot of bad things in my lungs no matter what. But it's interesting that Nanjing, who we argue if you go and visit Nanjing, you can find many extraordinary old parts of Nanjing, and the city wall is still there, but you can't see it in this video, which is relentlessly promotional of Nanjing Modern. And the oldest part where people live of any city in these three videos are really the older parts of Shanghai that are filmed, parts built probably in the teens and 20s of the last century.
And of course the Bund along Shanghai.
And then of course the Bund, the early 20th century. So Shanghai is an international and cosmopolitan city in 2 centuries being shown in that video. So it tells you actually a little bit less about each city and more about how their promoters would like you to see their city.
And that's exactly what our user Stu ___ commented, that these videos seem to say more about the personalities of the filmmakers than the personalities of the city. For instance, we have in the video of Shanghai, I remember listening to it, you have techno music, but then you have traditional Chinese instruments being played alongside techno music.
That's right. Well, my favorite comment on this is from John Farry, and it says, would these movies make me want to visit China? No, but ChinaX would. Thank you, John. And thank you all. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.